really difficult for me. We welcome to this event, which is towards a greener economy in Latin America. I would like to stress that CAF is really working in energy from a perspective which we consider is essential for Latin America, which is the just transition, which is something that many people is talking here about. So, as a development bank, we need to take into account that the first thing is to ensure accessibility for people to energy, but also to make sure that this energy is greener. And so as a bank, we offer technical cooperation, but of course we offer too knowledge, financial instruments, guarantees. And now, as you know, we have been increasing our portfolio in green finance with the objective to reach 40% of our approvals in 2026. This would imply that we are further working in energy, non-conventional renewals, and also conventional, but we mainly are trying to identify those areas where we can have an impact. For instance, I know that Fernando Branger, my colleague from the energy unit in CAF, will stress that, for instance, green hydrogen, which is something these days we have been talking about very much. So the Green Bank means that we are devoting more resources, we are devoting more, not only for loans, but also for technical cooperation and assistance. We are promoting energy transition, which means that we would like to make sure that through different instruments, such as reforestation and recovery, and with other elements, we are able to reduce the footprint of the energy sector in our countries. We would include sustainability in all of our operations and also work with new instruments. We heard these days very much about carbon markets. We heard about green bonds. This is something that we would like to really link to the energy markets in the region. And also, as a green bank, we are working with in all sectors, not only energy, but also in infrastructures, in water, and in agriculture. We are aware that the climate change challenge affects all our portfolio. So I think that I will finish now because even because I was late, I think it's important that I give the opportunity to my colleague to stress what the challenge of CAF are right now and to invite the people in the panel to discuss on this issue. Thank you very much, and please, Fernando, you have the floor.
Thank you, Alicia. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here to share with the audience about Latin America and the Caribbean and the energy transition in our region. So just to give us a brief idea of what the region is in terms of energy and emissions, I would like to bring this few slides. The first of all is that compared with the rest of the world, the region it's small, its contribution in terms of CO2 of CO2 emissions, but also how or where those emissions comes. It's different from the rest of the world. You see, 73% of the and the rest of the world, the emissions come from energy, but in our region, it's a little bit different because there is land, land use and deforestation and agriculture that contributes a lot. So in terms of how we compare with the rest of the world, it's a little bit different. Also, we have some issues about who can, who, who received the energy, who is in the power system. As you see, there are more than 4 million households in the region that doesn't have connections to the system. But also there's another issue, it's affordability. Some countries, affordability is a big issue. It's a very big issue. So how you bring energy in a very affordable way, that's a big challenge. And this is also very important, the dependency in terms of fiscal incomes from our countries, because there are some countries in the region that are producers. So this is a very important aspect to the future, how you will substitute this income from new incomes that does not come from the fossil fuel industry, and what you are going to do with those assets. That's a big question. We are heterogeneous. Some countries are 100% fossil fuels, but then you have other countries that are less than 60%. We have countries that their power system is 100% renewable, like Costa Rica and Paraguay. And we have other countries that have been doing enormous change in recent years in terms of bringing renewables to their system. As you see here, well, the green bar, it's what the global commitment is for 2030 in terms of emissions per kilowatt hour. This is in terms of grams, okay, grams per kilowatt hours. The region is well below the rest of the world right now, which is the yellow one. So it's a very clean energy power sector, I will say. But still, some countries needs to make an additional effort to bring those columns to the green one. And this is my last one, but says, yes, we are probably greener to the rest of the world in terms of the energy power sector. But if we see how this have been behaving in the last 20 years, what we can see is that basically Latin America and the Caribbean is increasing a little bit. I will say it's almost stable. And we can see the rest of the world, it's doing their effort to reduce. So the challenge here is for the whole region is how we can, lower those emissions in the power sector more of what we've done right now. So with this picture of the region, I will invite my colleagues, my panel, to the podium. And there is Dr. Barreto, which is from Brazil. So, okay, after this brief presentation, hello? Okay. After this brief presentation, I would like to ask Dr. Alfonso Bonilla, Blanco Bonilla, which is Secretario Ejecutivo Volade. You're permanently watching what's happening in Latin America in terms of energy, and you know very well what are the challenges. Do you see that Latin America, as the last, is have been stable? It's not doing the effort. It's something that probably we are, uh, you know, we like the way we are, or there is something more that is happening and we are not seeing in that picture.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Fernando. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation from CAF, a partner of Olade for a long time. The region has a particularity, that is the high penetration of hydro in the power generation, and a big hydro that was part of the history of the region at the beginning of 80s, end of the 70s, and that was part of the secret of the high renewability of the electricity matrix of Latin America. What is the situation? That big hydro is not possible to develop in the future in most of the countries, and now we are starting the incorporation of non-conventional renewables, but the rate that we are incorporating the non-conventional renewables is not the same in the different countries of the region, and because there are market conditions for the incorporation of new capacity from renewables, it's not the same to develop a non-conventional renewable project in Chile with investment grade, with very good resources in solar in the north, with solved internal barriers for the renewables. It's not the same to develop that kind of project in some countries in the region that doesn't have that ecosystem to promote the renewables, and that gap between countries is a real challenge for our region. Additionally, we don't have the possibility to introduce the big hydro projects in the future, because it's impossible under environmental constraints to develop that kind of new big projects. And in that sense, that there are a lot of countries that are advancing very good in the renewability, with diversification of the energy matrix, with very good conditions for renewable business in the region. But there are other countries that are not advancing in that sense, and in this kind of gaps is part of the flat situation that we can observe in the region. But there are other countries that did a very important effort in the renewability, because it's part of the development of the country. If you have a country like Uruguay, I was part of the transformation of Uruguay. When we started the process in 2005, we had 50% of renewability in the system. We finalized in 2019 with 98% of renewability, because we were oil importers with a high dependence of fossil fuels, and an important impact of fossil fuels in the power generation. And the effort of other countries in the same situation, like Chile, the important advance in Brazil regarding renewability, the incorporation of Colombia to the renewable markets important advances in the region. And to finalize, I want to highlight an additional aspect. The construction of the market, electricity markets in our region, is based on renewable energy auctions that demonstrated that are very important to have stable prices in the electricity markets in the region, with a high penetration of renewables, with long-term contracts for electricity markets. We are not observing the high prices that other markets are observing with this international energy crisis, and that I believe that is a strength of our electricity markets. But we have some problems and some challenges. 40% of the transport sector is the final energy consumption, and it's very difficult in our region to substitute that final consumption in the near future. And we have an important challenge in that sense, and that is part of the explanation of the evolution and the flat situation of the renewability in our region.
Thank you. Let's talk with Mel Slade, which is the Chief of Efficiency in emerging economies in the International Energy Agency. Mel, you have a broad view of the world. You're looking many countries beyond, the region. We are talking that we might have some kind of green power sector. We need to do a lot in terms of emissions in transport. How you see this and compare with the rest of the world? You see this as something unique, or you are seeing some regions that are more or less with the same problem? I'm talking, the problem of transport, which is main contributor of on our region. What means in terms of efficiency, because if we are gonna electrify the whole, sector, are we gonna have the same inefficiencies that we have today? So let's talk about a little bit.
Thank you very much. And maybe I can just start with a little bit of a global view, because we are the International Energy Agency and we like to frame things that way. So you talked about the impacts the energy crisis is and isn't having on the region, but from our observations, a crisis that seems to be fairly European based is actually having a massive impact on the rest of the world. And just for one example, in terms of electricity production costs, we're seeing increases in costs of something like 23% for Mexico, compared with 40% or more than 40% in Europe. So it's not that it's not happening. Maybe it's moderated a bit, but it's still very large. And of course, those energy cost rises are driving increases in prices of food, for example. It's not the only thing that's doing that, but it's a major contribution. So one thing that's important in the region is that increased poverty. So from kind of our estimates, there are probably something like 14 million more people regarded technically as poor than were before 2019 in the region. So they're still really important numbers, even though the region is somewhat protected in some way because of the way the energy system works. So, but to come to and just again more kind of generally, we see the need to get from where the world seems to be going today to where it needs to go for net zero, and that's taking into account the kind of stated policies of the world. You know, we see the need for something like a fourfold increase in investment in end use, and that's a combination mainly of efficiency and electrification. That's huge, and we're also seeing a big difference globally in terms of the rate of investment that's happening and what's needed. So in clean energy generally, again in emerging and developing economies, we see the need for about a fourfold increase again. This is by 2030. Whereas there's quite a lot more investment happening in other parts of the world. So it's only 3 times needed elsewhere, only 3, but 4 in emerging and developing economies. So there's some big issues there of you know, lack of uniformity of what's going on, and they of course you know, impact on the Latin America region too. To go to efficiency more specifically, and your point about transport, and hopefully we'll come back to other things, we are seeing, again, across the big emerging economies, a real problem with trucks. You know, with the distances moved that are moved by trucks, the amounts of freight, and they're going up. They're not going down, and they're not going to electrify quickly. We don't know what they're going to do. Maybe it's hydrogen, and who knows? That's still a point. So we see a huge opportunity for things like fuel economy standards or carbon or CO2 standards, if you prefer, for heavy-duty vehicles in particular. So that's something the region really could work on. These do exist in some parts of the world, but not so much in Latin America. We've talked a lot about electrification, and I'm sure my colleague from IRENA will talk some more about that too, but that brings opportunities for the region in terms of marrying highly efficient appliances, highly efficient buildings with state-of-the-art controls through digitalization, and then being able to really match the demand of the buildings with supply in a real-time way. So there's a huge amount of opportunity there. And I suppose, not wanting to emphasise it too much, the sense is because the region's been fairly energy rich and clean, there's probably quite a lot of wastage. So there's probably quite a lot that we can do very specifically in the region on energy efficiency, and maybe we can talk about some of those opportunities later.
Thank you, man. Let's have a I'm sorry, Dr. Binu Parthan from IRENA, Chief of Regions in IRENA. You have the view also in terms of renewables. We are saying that the region have this endowment in terms of hydro, and it was really an advantage at the start. Now, we've seen some countries that where the renewables, not conventional renewables, are entering to their power system. We have the case of Chile with solar. We have the case of Uruguay with wind. And in terms of demand, Brazil. Always Brazil is a big player. So everything that Brazil is, it's big. But there are other countries that still, you know, a little bit late in bringing this new technologies. This is something that you will see that will penetrate the whole region, or will, you know, keep this different, you know, some countries that will bring more non-traditional renewables, and others will stay the way they are. We have, for instance, some countries that have good hydro, but they still keep, their thermal units. So how you see this?
Thanks very much, and thanks to CAF for inviting Irina to join this very interesting discussion, and also with our partners from Olade and our sister agency, IEA, and we remain very optimistic about the region. Region, as you rightly said, does have traditional hydro-based renewables. There is a very good opportunity. What has happened over the last 5 to 10 years is that the costs of renewables has considerably come down to the extent that today solar and wind are the least cost in terms of the levelized cost of energy, the options for power generation. So that's very clear. And what we have seen over the last 5 years, 6 years is that every year almost 80% of capacity additions are from renewable energy. So we expect that to influence the power mix in the region. Now, we have scenarios for Central America up to 2050, and what we see is a clear increase in terms of renewables. Currently, it's about 67 in the power sector, which will go all the way up to 90 plus, and that is a natural consequence of the economic advantage of the renewable energy, particularly variable renewable energy. A challenge what we see is really the variability of solar and wind, and how the power sector will develop the flexibility to accommodate higher shares of renewables. And this is really where a new range of enabling technologies, including electricity storage, back of the meter supply side, and also associated policy frameworks and incentive frameworks to procure this flexibility in the energy system, that will need to be put in place. So this is very critical going forward, and this can result in a number of benefits to the region. Just to give a sense of renewable energy and the advantages, if you look at the traditional oil and gas investment and renewable energy, particularly solar, jobs or renewable jobs in general are about almost 50% more than the jobs that can be created. But what we see is from a gender perspective that for women to be employed in the energy sector, a sector such as solar traditionally has employed about twice the number of women compared to the traditional energy sector. So this is a significant social impact which will happen in the region as well. A key trend that we see in the region, and it's very clear from the graph that you showed, is the transport sector. We see significant electrification of the transport fleet driven by the personal vehicles. About 77% we see that being electrified. In terms of the fleets that Melanie alluded to, it lags a bit behind, but there are significant opportunities, but also there are challenges with the range, and there might need to be either infrastructure created. So going forward, we believe integration of variable renewables in the power sector in the region is a sort of foregone conclusion. It'll happen. The question is, how fast can we do that? And there you need these enabling technologies to introduce flexibility of the grid systems. And we also see significant demand for electricity as a result of electrification of transport, plus buildings and industry, and to some extent the agriculture, agro-processing and others to be electrified as well. So we're not, it's more a question of how fast that transition will happen. And that is really where the governments have an important role. Now, public sector in Latin America, like in other regions, do not have the resources to invest in this transition. So it needs to partner with the private sector. And that is where there is a very clear long-term policy signal, and stable policy signal is important. And we have seen some instances in the region of governments essentially backtracking on some of the commitments which are made to the private sector. And that's not really good for investments going forward. So this is something that, and we've also seen a bit of an effort to increase the role of the private sector in the energy sector as well in a number of countries. And these are not, let's say, in the long-term interest of the transition, and we need to let the markets play their role, the efficiency and the price reductions that it can bring. And the governments have an important role of ensuring safety, standardization, social justice, etc. So I think there are some opportunities in this region where governments can need to play a more long-term view about how the sector will develop. And a final point I would like to, I don't want to lose that, you did talk about energy access. So that 4 million is something which is often forgotten. And here, our experience in other parts and including in Africa and Asia is that poor people, and you did allude to affordability, our understanding is that poor people are, they can afford energy, and if you look at their energy expenses as the share of their income, that's disproportionately high. But they do buy kerosene because they don't have stable incomes. So the trick has been in other parts of the world is to really use things like mobile money, mobile wallets, and to bring down the transaction costs and create a digital ecosystem where poor people can actually purchase energy in very small units as they need it. So there are models elsewhere, more service-oriented models rather than the subsidy-based upfront cost models, which may be relevant to the region. And Irina did talk to Colombia to share some experience from other parts, etc. So I think that 4 million is an important segment which needs to be addressed as well. And there are lessons from other parts of the world which would be relevant to this region as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pathin. Dr. Barreto, can you hear us?
Yeah, Fernando, I'm hearing you.
Okay, good. Dr. Barreto is talking from Brazil. He's the Deputy Managing Director in charge of the energy area in Banco de Desenvolvimento de Brasil. So we were talking about, you know, the how the region have been doing lately with energy and basically how the renewables are in the region. But now we are confronting higher interest rates and more risk on a region. That translates in higher financial cost. So as a development bank, how you see that the development bank can act or can help to bring the investments to a region, given the fact that we are experiencing higher rates and more risks?
Thank you, Fernando. Good afternoon. Thank you, CAF, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in this panel, learn a lot with you all, and share some experience. Brazil is just to point some numbers in Brazil. Brazil is already a leader in the energy transition global race. The country is already more renewable than the average, with almost 50% of its energy matrix. If you see just the power sector, we are around 85% of electricity generation. In the beginning, hydro was the most important, as we have just said here. But now solar and wind and biomass are increasing. And we have also a capacity to improve it. We have around 1,500 gigawatts.
Can you hear me? I can see Malvina on the line, and I hope she's able to, her internet connection is working well. Malvina.
Yeah, hello, everyone.
Please do proceed.
Thank you so much. I'll proceed. Good morning.
Dr. Barreto, we are experiencing some problems with the communication. Can you hear us?
Are you hearing me? Yeah, Fernando, I hear you.
Okay. You can start again.
I don't know where Did you miss? I was telling that Brazil is.
Climate change.
Can you hear me?
Yes. If if I if
Okay,
I turn it
let's
off,
let's try.
is that if I turn it off, then
Oh, let's try to continue here. I was saying that Brazil is already very clean in the power and electricity generation, and how BNDES is trying to help this agenda. Yeah, we are already the biggest renewable energy finance in Brazil and top 3 in the world according to Bloomberg. We support projects around $35 billion. Our portfolio is already 70% of green economy and social development. But now, as you said, we are facing a new challenge. Meeting net zero targets is proving more challenge. The increasing of fossil fuel use, geopolitical tensions, inflationary shocks, higher interest rates. So what can be a role of a development bank here in Brazil? We think that our role is not just to provide funds, but also do advocacy, work together with government and private sector. For example, provide support for regulatory, contractual, policy frameworks, and work with partnerships and try to make some new and innovative solutions. Uh, and I think the onshore wind is a good example in Brazil. 10 years ago, there was no wind farms in Brazil, and now it's the second most important resource. And what did BNDES do? In the beginning, the early states, we helped the government to make the first auctions, and we financed the projects with better conditions, helping to de-risk these projects, and also try to develop the local supply chain in Brazil. So it was an opportunity to have a social development also with hundreds of thousands of jobs have been generated, around 100 component suppliers and more than 3,000 service suppliers were installed in Brazil. So it was a great opportunity. In the beginning, BNDES financed around 90% of the debit. In the second moment, we did the crowding in with the capital market and private sector, and now we finance only 25%, for example. So in the beginning, we helped to put it, to develop it, and now we want to make efforts of new green technologies, such as the offshore wind that doesn't exist in Brazil, but has a huge potential, around 700 gigawatts of potential. Also clean hydrogen, it's important to reduce carbon in some sectors, transport, heavy transport, for example. And I think we can do this job in new green technologies. Other examples here we are trying to develop as some innovations in financial solutions. We launched a solution that we call BNDES ESG Credit. It's following the sustainability linked loan concept that we offer interest rate reduction if the company achieves some ESG goals. So we try to encourage the companies to achieve these goals. In the recovery of COVID, for example, we made a linked loan to companies with high employees, for example. There are some goals of energy efficiency and others. Another solution that we think it's an important role of BNDES. We usually do grants in some projects, but now we are doing grants with the partnership of the company. So we put $1 as a donation, and the client put $1. So one example of this project is in Portuguese we call it Floresta Viva. In English it would be living forest. And it's a match funding with companies and governments. The objective is to finance ecological restoration projects in Brazilian biomes with native species and agroforestry systems. So we estimate up to 66,000 hectares we think will be restored, and we have already almost 1 billion reais to do these projects. And a lot of great companies, of energy companies that are in Brazil, are committed with this project. So it's a way also to encourage the companies to invest in ESG projects. And the last example I'd like to say is the play that PNS is doing in sustainability, in sustainable bonds. And now we can do the traditional loan as a development bank, but now we can invest also in bonds, so that to attract the capital markets and attract lenders. And if it's a sustainable bond, we make a discount on the interest rate around 10 bits, for example. So there are some examples that we are trying to do, not only the fund, but a coordination with the government and private sector, and try to innovate in our solutions so that we can encourage the companies to achieve ESG goals and also to attract capital markets and co-lenders.
Thank you, Dr. Barreto. Mel, you said and that probably because the region is abundant in energy, there's some waste of energy. So there's more than technology to improve the efficiency. What the region can do to improve energy efficiency?
What a big question. So, in our experience, we don't see major improvements in energy efficiency without very strong policy settings, without mandatory requirements, be they energy performance standards for appliances, for buildings, for vehicles, or mandatory targets for sectors, industrial sectors in particular. When we see those well designed and implemented, we see progress. So I would say that's where the region should consider looking. There are some appliance standards, of course, in many countries, but we'd like to suggest that they could be more ambitious. And they could be more ambitious cost effectively without impinging on the choice of consumers. It would still reduce their bills, even if in some cases they might have to pay a little more for products to start with. But of course that's an area that policy can drive too. It is possible to alleviate those upfront costs by various means. So really mandatory requirements across all sectors would make a difference. And there's evidence all around the world from that. We've got really good numbers on appliance policies, for example, where countries have been doing them aggressively and updating them over decades, or countries and regions that have been doing that, let's say, are using about 15% less electricity now than they would have been. And those savings grow as you continue to invest in those programs. In Europe, they're expecting by 2030 to hit about 25% savings from their appliance policy programs. I mean, one of the things we're doing at the moment is working with a group of countries in Latin America to look at their appliance policies for some key appliances that are important, particularly cooling. Because, of course, cooling is increasing, the need for cooling is increasing. The need to keep people safe and productive is increasing. And so if you have better efficiency of cooling products and also better efficiency of the buildings that the cooling's happening in, you would have less stress on grids as well as have really cost-effective investments in efficiency. So we're working with a group of countries to see if we can persuade the network that you have to engage, and that's the policymakers, that's the manufacturers, it's the standards bodies, the national standards bodies, it's test labs. You have to get that whole community to work together if you're going to get more ambitious standards in place without just having years and years of fruitless negotiation. So we're trying to get this group of we're working with a group of countries to see if they would consider working more closely together, collaborating more closely to collectively improve appliance standards. That's something, it's a process that started at COP26, and we're continuing to this day. So we're having workshops and making proposals for what the standards could look like, and seeing whether we can, the countries working together can bring each other along. So that's one thing. And of course, as you said, the policymakers, the public service isn't very well equipped, well resourced in many countries. So we need the donor community, we need the multilateral development banks to understand that you have to invest in policy too, not just technology. And that's not always the case. Some are good at it, but if you don't have the policymakers able to do this stuff, for the long term, if you don't build that infrastructure within people, then it will be very difficult, if not impossible, to roll out many projects. So there's a long-term investment needed in the people. And there are capacity building opportunities, of course, which CAF and the IEA have collaborated on before, and hopefully will continue to do so. But there's a lot of work that needs to go on there. I guess they're the main things, but there may be others that come to mind as we continue the conversation.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you a question to all of you, and it's about the new kid in the block, hydrogen. How hydrogen, we saw the last report from the IAE, and the only time that the report talks about the region, it's about hydrogen. They foresee an important future in terms of hydrogen in the region. We've seen a lot of ideas, a lot of projects. Some of those projects better developed than others in terms of just the figures, but how do you see this? Is it really something that's going to happen? Where is the market? Where are the players? And is the technology there? Is the technology competitive enough to think about hydrogen? Let's start with Dr.
Yeah, it's a good question. We have 180 odd member states, and okay. So we're getting a lot of requests from hydrogen roadmaps, and we have 184 member states. Now, I think we understand that 135 have hydrogen roadmaps. So it's become a very big, interesting opportunity for policymakers and others. Our belief is that hydrogen is primarily going to be a domestic option for decarbonizing some really hard to decarbonize sectors like heavy industry, long distance transport, aviation, navigation, etc. And its role as a export opportunity is likely to be regional. And our analysis shows you look at a threshold of about $1.50 per kilogram or so. The biggest, the technical potential of renewable energy, land availability, etc., it's primarily going to be in Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East. And again, you need to have the infrastructure for either pipelines or shipping, because gas is really a gas plus transport industry. So there are a number of questions. So we see hydrogen playing something like a 10% role in 2050. The current enthusiasm and the big export opportunity for hydrogen currently that we see isn't really justified in the long run, but still we continue to. Tomorrow we'll launch a report with the German G7 presidency as to how G7 will take the hydrogen leadership. And we already launched a roadmap for Europe. We'll launch one for Japan, and in Davos we'll launch one for China. Everyone is wanting to be the leader in hydrogen, but one needs to recognize that it's a primarily domestic opportunity for very difficult sectors and not really like a huge defining opportunity. It's going to be important, but not the most important option.
Dr. Barreto, what's your view of the hydrogen for Brazil? And very short, because we are short of time.
Okay. We are very excited in Brazil this agenda. As we have a competitive cost in wind and solar, it's the forecast is that we have a competitive cost of green hydrogen production around $1 per kilo, for example, in 2030. So it's an opportunity for us to develop some industry in the country of making green products, such as steel, ammonia, and chemicals, methanol, and have a superior market value if you compare with fossil fuel products. So McKinsey, for example, forecasts $200 billion in investments in Brazil until 2040 in this industry. So we think we can develop this. We are starting some small scale projects in 2023, especially in steel industry and ammonia industry will be the first factories. But we think we have an opportunity in the middle term to also export these green products. So we are very excited with the agenda.
Thank you. Alfonso, what's the future for hydrogen in the region?
Well, the region has very good conditions for hydrogen production, considering costs and the resources that the region has for wind and solar. The key question here is the market. Which will be the market for hydrogen and how the demand can design the system and the offer for the future. It's very difficult to make the project finance if you don't have the real off-taker of the hydrogen, and that is the key factor, because we have a regional demand for hydrogen that we can have a value change for hydrogen, but to have the scale for an hydrogen market and the investment that is needed for a cost competitive hydrogen, we need a more definition on which will be the market, and that is not clear right now.
Well, thank you very much. Our time is time, so thank you to our panelists today, and it was a really very good discussion this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.